A massive part of I guess, the reason why I'm actually writing these stories in the first place, aside from it being a compulsion to write this whole insanely complex tapestry of story that I'm calling Vale's Edge. One thing, it's fun. And why is it fun? And I love the whole concept of the world being a playground and art being a playground and not taking everything too seriously, but taking it seriously because, the imaginal realm is where everything exists. That's where everything that could possibly exist has potential. Let's put it that way. So I think a lot about this whole reality, actually, that when we are making sense of anything in the world or, you know, understanding something in its totality, I suppose, or even just a little bit of it, that requires an experience. So, as some of you might already know, my intention when I'm writing or creating some kind of visual that accompanies that, or even working on my website, in my groups, or when I speak, I want, or actually leading meditation, right? Like a meditative process. It is because the only shifting or change or growth or evolution or creation itself, creation only happens or is made manifest, let's put it that way, if you experience what we're talking about. So we can write reams of, words on a page and, have someone read it and think, well, that's kind of a cool idea, you know? But when that person experiences it, whether it is through a shared experience, through a story that enlivens it for them, or a meditative experience that they go into with the intention of being there present with it rather than just sort of intellectually observing it. You're immersed in the experience. And so this can happen with pieces of art. And not only writing, of course, there's paintings and there's sculpture and there, all kinds of things that, ways that people express through art. And we're just sticking with writing here, but it could be literally anything. But it could be an adventure. It could be a lived experience, off the page or off the canvas, out of the studio. And it's this shared experience, I think, that, well, the experience for sure, but the shared experience that brings, it shifts things in people's relationship and how they understand the world and each other. And that's the power of art. That's the power of the written word. That is the spell casting that can take place. And so I've written a lot of nonfiction. And nonfiction, as far as whatever I feel like is part of my own story or history, and that's kind of like, I would consider anything writing about yourself like autobiographical to be, or a personal essay or something to be creative nonfiction. It's because it's creative, and so it adds the element of like what is. I mean, it's not necessarily truth; it's my truth. Yeah, it's the way I've remembered something, and we all have a different way of remembering. We might even sort of like have completely different memory of something, which often happens. Actually, I just had a conversation with a family member the other day, and it's like, no, I didn't think of it that way at all, and it wasn't denial. It was like literally, it wasn't the same. My experience wasn't the same. So we have our individual experiences, and we can write nonfiction. Like I said, I've written a lot of nonfiction. I wrote a giant book called Family Health Revolution, and it had some creative elements in it, some personal story, but it was also like kind of like, a presentation of what I consider to be facts about human health and our place in it and our agency in how we can we are the agents, right, in our own wellness. So it was all information to help people to realize that about themselves and to practice their own, I guess I'm going to use the word agency again, in their desire, I guess, or intention to feel well, right? To overcome limitations, to heal. So I've done a lot of nonfiction and essays and that sort of thing. I came from an academic background, actually, in literature and teaching and such like that. And I find it useful, definitely, as a tool, you know. And then when we move though into this nonfiction realm, you know, and actually when we're learning nonfiction, actually, you know, like let's say we're reading about history, which we can also say that a lot of history is fictional or creative nonfiction in some ways too, but that's another story for another time. But as far as nonfiction goes, if it's told by way of story, and if, let's say, you're a child within a group of children and you're being taught, you know, say like the history of, you know, the area you live in and the people that came before you, and if it's just sort of static, and you kind of just, you know, told the facts, 100%, you know, those kids aren't going to remember because they're not engaged. They didn't experience it. They didn't get to play in the same playground. It's totally like flat and 2D to them. It's just, it doesn't matter. It's not fun. And some things aren't the best things to learn. Like, let's say we're learning about slavery. It's not easy, but it still can come alive, you know, in the imagination. And so how do we do that? Well, we tell a story. We tell the story about it. And so that's why storytelling, story making, is such a beautiful, I don't even want to use the word delivery because it seems like it has this utilitarian purpose to deliver a message. But I mean, literally, it's just telling the story so that we can connect on all the connection points that are possible there. Yet we don't dictate what those might be, which is actually really the fun part. So again, I've written a lot of nonfiction, and then moving into fiction was fundamental for me, and on a lot of different levels. And I've written fiction still throughout the years, but moving into writing fiction for this particular story that I wanted to tell, it wasn't even like a want. It was just, it was coming up like I couldn't stop it. The second I said, I do not want to write any of the like books like the ones I'd been reading. I started to get back into fantasy fiction. And I thought, there's no way I would want to do that. I'm just going to enjoy what people create because this is so good and I'm having so much fun and I just want to enjoy it. I want to just take, you know, like the passenger seat. I don't want to drive. I want to be taken on a ride. And as soon as I said that, I think these books started to be born. Yeah, you do want to do this, Carla. You want to be the passenger and you also want to take people through this shared experience, through these stories that are just, and I love to say, pressing at the bottle's neck. They just are making themselves known. It's just up to me to allow them to come out. So this is what I'm doing now, like full time. Like I would never have guessed it a year and a half ago, never in a million years. So getting back to the topic of experience and how, you know, for anything that's an idea to be made manifest, it must be experienced. And how to experience that? Well, it's through story. At least that's one of the ways. And we tell our own stories. And sometimes we tell stories to ourselves that aren't serving us. We can rewrite the stories. We can erase and transmute and grow from them. All those sorts of things that I'm just going to continue to talk about through these musings or my podcasts or writing workshops and such. But there's also, I think, really important is the shared experience. And I actually literally, I know this happens. I have people tell me all the time, if they've read something, whether it's my work or someone else's, or, looked at a painting or whatever, engaged in anybody else's art, words, podcast episode, doesn't matter. But they were somehow transported into this this story that it told, that piece of art told. And they had epiphanies or connection points, ways of viewing the world that like was opened up because they simply allowed themselves to be present, or the artist themselves was very skilled at inviting them into this experience with them that they had created. And I've always said, there's like, if you go into a bookstore, people say, well, I'm not a reader, and like, let's say it's Christmas time. Like, let's say you participate in Christmas and you buy gifts for people. And I've always said, you go into a bookstore and there's a book for everyone. And you don't have to be a reader. And actually now in this day and age, we have audiobooks, which is the coolest thing because it's opening up a whole new world for people who previously were not able to enter that experience of story, because whether it be how their brain works, they could get distracted. They always thought they couldn't read very well. They actually really enjoy the cadence of the speaking voice. They feel more connected if there's a narrator or a storyteller, like whatever that might be, like trouble like with coding or, retaining the written word. Everybody learns or experiences differently. And with that, I don't know, like it's like a tidal wave of, newness that happens with this, introduction or more introduction, more people doing or creating audiobooks with the written books, which I'm definitely like, that's a huge part of this. But I digress. Okay, so we have this piece of art that's presented in the way that it is meant to come, or that it came from this particular artist, writer. And then we have the reader who is engaging with it. And that could be a relationship that is just like, you don't know each other. Someone somewhere in the world read your piece. And it could even be a friend. They could become friends. But even deeper than that, and personally speaking, the process of my own writing and sharing my own writing, and I knew this. I knew I wanted to share it as I was writing it, and with specific people that would put the intention of paying attention to the words that I was writing. And yes, it was for me, because writing can be a solitary experience. And sometimes it needs to be, so that you can be clear and have the time and space to be able to create without distraction, to be able to, integrate all that you come across in the world and distill that into, or pull, like the little jewels from, the net that you've cast in the world, that you want to pull, place strategically in this piece of art you're creating or curating even. But then you let go for the reader's response. And that is actually where the play happens. That's where that interaction of two independent beings with free will get to extract their own meaning from the work. And so that is magic right there. That's magic right there. And then this element that is more personal is where I'm actually seeing, like, I just had evidence of that yesterday, and I was pleasantly surprised, but I don't know if the word is surprised. And the word is absolutely, it's not excited either, but whatever that feeling came up for me, like just bubbled forth of like, not epiphany, but like, and it's maybe proof, But I don't like that either because I don't want to be right. I'm not looking to be right. But I knew that the more I shared, the more revelations would happen within individual lives, but also within my relationships and even my relationship to myself. So I shared, instead of answering, and it wasn't a question, it was, like a revelation about a relationship, like, a relationship in my life. And the person said to me something, and I was like, yes, okay, that is wonderful. And I feel connected on that point. And then I didn't respond with like a thought out, just, text back. I actually responded with a piece of writing from my book. And I said, this is not to ignore what you just said. It is to express in a story my response, or maybe an example, or metaphorically, or, through story. I mean, I'm going to say that over and over. Sorry, I'm repeating myself, but through story, I'm going to respond. And so I sent this, and it was an audio. And then the response was profound. This person was replying to me in ways that I'd never heard them speak, and making up or contributing their own story, and wanting to know what the ending is, but also having their own imagery and their own, kind of like walking through or tumbling through or adventure through the story I was telling. And they said that they were thinking about it later in the day, and what happened. Okay, here's what happened. For those of you reaching out in such way, or being affected in such a way, or even the person that's like, the book that you're reading wasn't even written about, like, from the person that you're connecting with through the story. It doesn't have to be. It could just be any story. But what's happening is that that story is being shared, and it's awakening the imagination, and it is opening up more possibility than any other, like, static small s story might have been, told. They might have been telling themselves before. It's expanded. It's experienced. It's expanded through experience. So I have to say, that was really cool. and and I was hoping for that. I was hoping for a response that was, it had depth to it, that arrested someone long enough, and with enough, I don't know if it's not force, with enough, like, it brightens them. It like, it sends them off into another frequency or energy through inspiration and possibility and curiosity. And it's like, oh my God, I totally get it now. And not just your point of view, not at all. That's actually why the story was more appropriate in this instance. It was not to be convinced of another person's point of view, but an awakening of a broader view of the whole picture. So I'm going to stop there before I repeat myself for a millionth time. But it was this thing we're calling story, that we are expressing as art, or sharing as art, or engaging in, the whole purpose of it, or when it is in its most powerful potential, is when the reader and the writer both have an experience through it. So happy writing, happy creating, happy sharing, and thank you for playing.